I was standing on the back patio of my house in Scottsdale on a quiet Sunday morning. The sun was just coming up over the McDowell Mountains, casting long shadows across the yard. I was holding a cup of black coffee, staring at an old lemon tree near the block wall that had completely died over the winter. The branches were gray, brittle, and totally bare. Alyssa was inside the house, sitting at the kitchen island, quietly reading a magazine. We had not spoken more than 10 words to each other since we woke up. I was 60 years old. And as I looked at that dead tree, I had a sudden suffocating realization that hit me right in the chest. My marriage had become exactly the same thing. We were still occupying the same yard, still standing next to each other, but the root system was completely dry. We had not been physically intimate in over a year. We had silently, without ever having a real conversation about it, transitioned into polite roommates who simply managed a household together. I was letting the most important connection in my life slowly turn to dead wood because I was entirely too proud to admit that my physical drive had collapsed. If you are watching this right now and you are living in a quiet house where the physical distance between you and your wife feels like a permanent condition, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I know exactly how heavy that unspoken agreement is, and I know how incredibly easy it is to convince yourself that a sexless marriage is just the inevitable result of getting older. I am going to share exactly what I figured out when I finally decided to stop accepting that dead silence. And I promise you, the mechanical and behavioral secrets that govern a woman's attraction to an older man are not what society tells you they are. I spent that entire Sunday afternoon out in the yard with a heavy steel shovel, digging up that dead root system until my hands were blistered. I was furious with myself. I had spent my entire career as a corporate sales executive aggressively pursuing growth, negotiating difficult contracts, and refusing to accept failure in the boardroom. But inside my own house, I had completely surrendered. I was quietly blaming Alyssa's age, her changing hormones, and her supposed lack of interest. But when I finally had the courage to look at my own behavioral and biological hardware, I realized she was simply reacting to a man who had completely stopped transmitting the signals of a capable mate. I was a ghost in my own home. I had to fundamentally rebuild the way I operated as a biological organism, and it came down to 5 specific mechanical secrets that completely reverse the roommate dynamic. The first secret is understanding that you have likely burned out your own internal drive system through cheap digital stress. The male desire for intimacy is heavily governed by dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical that creates the drive to pursue, to connect, and to initiate action. For years, I would sit on the couch every evening, scrolling through endless news feeds on my phone, checking work emails, and letting the chronic anxiety of the world flood my brain through a glowing screen. I was constantly artificially spiking and draining my dopamine receptors. When your brain is exhausted from processing constant digital panic, the reward center simply shuts down. You lose the aggressive, natural urge to pursue your partner because your chemical tank is completely empty. I had to implement a ruthless digital curfew. I forced myself to leave my phone in another room after dinner. I had to let my brain suffer through the severe boredom of a quiet evening so my dopamine receptors could slowly reset and heal. When I stopped frying my own wiring with cheap stress, the natural, primitive desire to physically connect with my wife slowly started to come back online. The second secret involves a massive mechanical failure in your internal plumbing that nobody ever talks about. We hear constantly about cardiovascular health, but we completely ignore the lymphatic system. Your lymphatic system is responsible for clearing out cellular waste and keeping your immune and hormonal responses sharp. But unlike your blood vessels, the lymphatic system has no pump. It does not have a heart. It relies entirely on the physical contraction of your muscles to push the fluid through the pipes. Decades of sitting behind a desk and lounging on a couch had turned my internal fluid into stagnant sludge. I felt constantly heavy in my joints, lethargic, and physically dull. I started implementing a daily routine of deep, full-body movement. Not just walking on a flat surface, but exercises that required my body to twist, compress, and expand under tension. I forced the stagnant fluid out of the deep tissues. When you clear the internal sludge, your physical energy changes instantly. You stop moving like a fragile, tired old man and start moving with the physical crispness of someone who is actually alive inside their own skin. The third secret is the absolute hardest for men our age to accept because it requires starving our own egos. When the bedroom dies, a man becomes incredibly insecure. Every time I touched Alyssa, whether it was a hand on her shoulder or a hug in the kitchen, there was a heavy, silent expectation attached to it. I was touching her because I wanted something in return. I was treating physical affection like a covert transaction, hoping it would lead to a physical response later that night. Women have a biological radar for this that is razor sharp. When they feel that needy, heavy expectation, their nervous system registers it as a demand and they shut down completely. I had to completely remove the transaction from our house. I started touching her with zero expectation of a result. A hand on the back when I walked past, a kiss on the forehead, and then I would immediately walk away and go handle my own business. I stopped hovering. I took the suffocating pressure completely out of the air. By giving her the physical space to breathe, I allowed her own natural desire to eventually wake back up. If the mechanical logic of resetting your brain chemistry and removing the heavy pressure from your relationship makes sense to you, or if you are completely exhausted from living in a house that feels like a quiet library, hit the like button right now. It is incredibly important that we get this specific conversation in front of other men who are currently sitting on their couches, quietly blaming their wives for a distance they actually created themselves. We have to share the mechanics that actually rebuild the connection. The fourth secret is a direct biological reality about how we operate as physical animals. I am not talking about wearing expensive cologne. I am talking about the primitive chemical signals that a man's body produces when it is under heavy physical demand. For years, I lived a completely sterile, climate-controlled existence. I went from an air-conditioned house to an air-conditioned car to an air-conditioned office. I never sweat. I never pushed my body hard enough to produce the chemical byproducts of testosterone that naturally signal vitality to a partner. I started training in my garage with the door open in the brutal Arizona heat. I forced my body to lift heavy weight, to struggle, and to sweat profusely. That physical demand does not just build muscle tissue. It fundamentally changes your biological signature. It changes the way you smell, the way you carry your jaw, and the subtle chemical signals you broadcast into the room when you walk inside. You cannot trigger a primitive, instinctual response in your partner if you are living an entirely synthetic, sterile life. The fifth secret is reclaiming the vocal and physical space in your own home. When a man loses his baseline vitality and his physical drive, he physically shrinks. I did not realize it at the time, but I had started speaking much softer. I avoided minor conflicts. I walked lightly around the house, trying not to disturb anything. I was acting like an apologetic guest in my own life. A woman cannot maintain physical attraction for a man who is constantly apologizing for his own existence. I had to consciously rebuild my masculine polarity. I started speaking from my chest again. I stopped avoiding difficult conversations. I took ownership of decisions instead of just passively asking her what she wanted to do. This is not about being aggressive, loud, or controlling. It is about being a grounded, immovable force in the house. When a man reclaims his physical and vocal presence, the polarity of the relationship instantly shifts. She no longer felt like she was managing a dependent. She felt the presence of a capable man again. Getting the dopamine reset, clearing the lymphatic sludge, removing the transactional touch, changing my biological signature, and reclaiming my presence completely dismantled the roommate dynamic in my house. But I am an absolute realist about the biological friction of being an older man. Reversing a systemic decline takes a massive amount of metabolic energy. After decades of chronic stress and environmental exposure, the communication signals between your brain and your physical hardware are often deeply corroded, and the liver is usually suffocating under a backlog of excess estrogen. I realized that to maintain this new baseline, I needed internal reinforcement. I refused to rely on synthetic prescriptions that just mask a symptom while ignoring the actual engine block. I went looking for a natural protocol that specifically targeted the brain signals and the internal filtration system. The formulation I use every single day relies heavily on maca. This compound does not flood your body with fake external hormones. Instead, it works directly on the communication lines, regulating the exact signal your brain sends to your reproductive organs, ensuring the message to produce and respond is transmitted clearly and efficiently. The protocol also uses milk thistle. This is a critical component that supports the liver, helping it actively flush out the excess estrogen and toxins that build up in older men and silently suffocate your physical drive. I never tell another man what he should or should not add to his routine, but if you want to look at the exact formulation I rely on to keep my internal communication clear and my filter clean, I put a link in the pinned comment right below this video. You can also simply scan the QR code you see on your screen right now. I spent a long time looking for a clean, logical mechanism that I could actually trust to put in my body. Because here's the profound truth about a sexless marriage that nobody wants to admit. It is never a mutual, peaceful agreement. It is always a slow, quiet tragedy of two people who forgot how to communicate with their biology. When you accept the roommate phase, you are not just giving up physical intimacy. You are giving up the deepest, most vital anchor of your partnership. When I finally fixed my own mechanical failures and changed the way I occupied my own house, I did not just get my sex life back. I got the woman I married back. The resentment evaporated. The house felt warm again. We stopped simply existing next to each other and started actually living together again. Many men quietly watch their marriages turn into logistical partnerships because they are terrified to look under the hood of their own physical and behavioral failures. They blame their wives, blame their age, and just wait the clock out. You do not have to accept a sterile, quiet house as your permanent reality. You have the absolute authority to change the signal you are transmitting. Tell me in the comments, have you noticed the physical distance growing in your own house, and did you find yourself blaming your partner before looking at your own habits? I read every single comment, and I know exactly how lonely that specific silence can be. Do not spend another year treating your wife like a polite roommate. The longer you let poor neurochemical habits and a stagnant physical presence define your marriage, the harder it is to rebuild the bridge. Start managing your dopamine and moving heavy loads tomorrow morning. Take the heavy expectation out of your touch. And if you want to give your internal engine the specific cellular support it needs to clear the excess estrogen and repair the brain signals, look at the protocol I use. The link is right there in the pinned comment below, and the QR code is on your screen. Take a serious look at the biological mechanisms of the ingredients. Decide for yourself if the logic makes sense for the exact frustration you are dealing with in your own home. I am Cole Harrison. Keep doing the work.